There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another video. This is a vlog. I'm doing a secret Black History Month vlog, and let me explain why. The secret part just is because that's a quirk of my personality. I love to spring surprises on y'all. My 2025 reading year is supposed to be about me getting my reading, how many books I'm reading concurrently, and how many books kind of fall off the edges of my current reads and so on, getting that under control. So, at the risk of upsetting that apple cart, I decided yesterday, thinking about everything going on in the world, particularly all the bullshit anti-DEI stuff in the States and the stench of racism coming out of that particular part of the world, and not that the rest of the world doesn't have our own problems with all that poisonous discourse. It's ridiculous that I can't fit in some reading for Black History Month. And for me, typically, when I read for Black History Month, it is fiction, but I'm going to mix it up a bit. And I'm going to dip into and dabble a lot, but I do want to finish a few of the books I'm going to tell you about. So this is my introductory post. The first one that I want to dip into, because it's, I think, 600 pages or something, is the Black Prairie Archives and Anthology, edited by Karina Vernon. I signed this out from the University Library about a year ago, and I think all I managed to get read was the introduction. It was absolutely fascinating. And I'm certainly not going to finish it this month or even this year, but it might be one that I pick up every February for Black History Month. I have an ebook copy from Libby. It is the Canadian Prairies, Black Life, and lots of nonfiction, historical articles, memoir, poetry, and some fiction as well. It's a multi-genre mix of Black life on the prairies of Canada, which is where I live, so I'm going to dip into that. There is a Black American novel that I've had my eye on and been curious about for years, and I have the ebook on my Kindle or somewhere, and damn it all, I'm going to read it this month. Here it is. It is called Passage by Khary Lazarre-White. Look at that cover. I just think that's just a luscious cover. It's a short novel, about 200 pages, a coming-of-age story set in 1993 in Harlem and Brooklyn. And that's all I know about it, and I'm going to probably start that one today and report back about my preliminary thoughts as early as later today. And another one that I have access to on audio, and I'll probably end up buying the book, especially if I feel I would get more out of it. But that's the latest work of poetry by the Black American non-binary poet Danez Smith, Bluff. It's also on Everand as an audiobook, and like I say, I will get an ebook or buy the hard copy if I can do that easily. I will intend to finish this month. This is Blame It on Roz, but also Joe Smith. I watched Roz's penultimate video last night where she talked about her February reading plans. One of them was a short story collection I had never heard of, called Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver. Apparently, it was written in the 50s or maybe 60s. She died very young, and now it's been brought back into print. And it sounds marvelous. Joe Smith left a comment on Roz's video to say that it was one of her top reads of last year. So it's like, okay, I'm doing this. I have an Audible membership. I chose that as my selection for this month. I also ordered a hard copy, which will be coming by Valentine's Day, so I'm really excited about that and do hope to finish it. The last two, I know I'm probably biting off more than I can chew, but I probably will just dabble. Like, this is another short story collection, and I might only get one or two read, but I will continue with it. The author was one of my mystery guests last year. This is Perfect Little Angels by Vincent Anioke. Short story collection that came out from Arsenal Pulp Press last year. They are mostly set in Nigeria, and there's a lot of queer characters in it, and I believe some of the stories are set in Canada featuring Nigerian Canadian queer characters, so my goodness, I can't wait to get started on this one, but probably it will just be a bare start. My intention is I'll post this vlog a week before the end of February, something like that. And lastly, this is a book of African American poetry that I've had on my shelf for years, and I have hardly opened it. It is called Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry, Poems and Artifacts by Nikky Finney. It's a gorgeous hardcover book. I special ordered it when I lived in Japan. It cost me about $40 at the time. It's time to see what it's all about. I remember previewing it. It's got lots of visual photographs and images in it. And I believe many of the poems are about physical objects that have a story to them. And I know I won't finish this one. I highly doubt I'll finish this one in February. But I'm certainly wanting to sample it as much as I can find the time, because this has to be fit around my other reading commitments for February. So let's see how I do, shall we? I am really excited about this. Me reading a bunch of black literature in February is not going to change the world, but damn it, it's important. Let's get started, shall we? All right, here I am on Saturday night, February 8th, and I have been having a really good time. That sounds a little bit too lightweight for the kind of experience it's been to start dipping into these. So I have a few things to say, and I don't want to make a long check-in because I don't want to make a long vlog. But the first thing I have to say is that I did not get along with that novel that I've been drooling over the cover all these years and fantasizing about finally reading it. And I tried it. I didn't read maybe more than 10 pages before I realized it wasn't going to work for me. The novel is Passage by Khary Lazarre-White. One of the categories that Goodreads lists it as is YA. It was a very young black man, and it was his voice, which I found, his first-person voice, just didn't compel me enough. Maybe I read about 15 pages, and I thought, this just isn't going to work. I put that aside, but I'm not going to put the author aside. Khary Lazarre-White, I found out, is fascinating. Here is his picture, and he has this one novel, but more than that, he's a New York guy. He founded at the age of 21 the Brotherhood Sister Soul, Bro Sis, which is now nationally renowned, a Harlem-based social justice, youth development, and educational organization. And he and that organization have done a lot of really wonderful work. So I am already, just from reading a couple of biographical sketches of Khary Lazarre-White, he's also a trained lawyer, and he's done lots of public speaking on MSNBC and here, there, and everywhere. And the Wall Street Journal called Passage, it was on their best new fiction list. Don't not try it because of me. But I want to promote him and say that I didn't think that book was going to work for me, so I didn't continue with it. So then I scrambled around because I wanted something that was short enough that I could finish within about 3 weeks. And that was really difficult because there's a stupendous amount of black literature, fiction, short stories, novels, whatever, and history that I'm very interested in reading, but none of it was like 200 pages or less. So eventually I found, and I can't remember if it's actually under 200 pages, but it was close enough, a short story collection. Let me pull that up here. Yeah, 224 pages in hardcover, and I found it on Everand, that used to be called Scribd, in both ebook and audiobook, and I have read the first story in both ways. There's a lot of depth to it, so I reread it textually just now, and oh my god, what a fine story. Oh, I suppose you want to know the title and author. It is called Heads of the Colored People, and the author is Nafissa Thompson-Spires. She is young. She was born a year before I graduated high school, in San Diego in 1983. She appeared on Late Night with Seth Meyers in 2018. This is her only book, and what a fine story I read. It's the title story, but the title story is actually called, it has a longer title. You can do a preview right off the Goodreads page, or probably presumably on Kindle as well. This was published, I think, in 2018. And here's the full title of that first story. Heads of the Colored People, 4 fancy sketches, 2 chalk outlines, and no apology. I'm not going to spoil it, so I'll just talk about it for just a couple of minutes. It opens with one of the main characters, Riley, and he is a black guy who doesn't feel confined by what black men should be. He is straight, but he dresses metrosexually, and he has his hair dyed blonde, and he wears clothes that stereotypically black men of his age, his era, his decade didn't. and I didn't really catch when it was set. There's a lot of references to the 90s that I thought were references to the past, and he's walking down the street one day dressed up for a cosplay convention. He and his girlfriend are into cosplay, so he's dressed up as a Japanese anime character. I'd never heard of that series that he's in. And some other black guy comes up and tries to hand him something. The cosplay guy is wearing headphones, and he just doesn't really pay any attention to the guy stuffing a pamphlet in his face. And that's an insult to the other guy who we meet. And he is a amateur manga artist, and he has his own manga cartoon, and he's trying to get a lucky break. So he's handing out free samples at the entrance to this cosplay thing, and he feels really dissed that the cosplay guy blows him off and starts to scuffle with him. And that's all I'll say about that. But then the other characters are a struggling artist, also a black guy, who wants to make an exhibition based on this, and this is where the title comes in, Heads of the Colored People. Heads of the Colored People, you may know about, I didn't know, and it was a fascinating part of this whole story, and I just delighted in looking stuff up about it. It was a series of texts that were composed by an African-American physician, abolitionist, and intellectual. His name, and here's his picture, James McCune Smith. And he contributed these sketches to Frederick Douglass's journal called Paper in the 1850s. And they're character studies and social political commentary of mid-19th century black life. And this artist in the story, I think his name is Kevin, he wants to create some work of visual art that is in dialogue with those texts and black life today. And there's references also to other important figures in African American history of the same era. William J. Wilson, his pen name was Ethiop, not Ethiopia, but Ethiop. He was a writer, educator, and abolitionist. And he wrote a series called African-American Picture Gallery, published in the Anglo-African magazine. And that is all mixed up in a fascinating way with the Heads of the Colored People. And then Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who wrote under the pen name Jane Rustick, African-American poet, novelist, and activist. And she wrote something in 1872 called Sketches of Southern Life. In just one short section, Nafissa Thompson-Spires brings all these historical figures and their texts in. It's one long paragraph or about a page, but it vibrates through the whole rest of the story that's set more in the present day. And I'm not going to say anything more about how it ends. You have to read it. But one of the things that intrigued me was the way that the narrator would address the reader in a really intriguing way. That's all I'll say. The first story knocked my socks off. So that's starting out good. So that was my replacement for Passage. I have also now started to get acquainted with this book of poetry. Nikky Finney's Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry, Poems and Artifacts, which I've had on my shelf for about 5 years. And I am in love with this book. The only thing I'm going to read, I might read a few short quotes from epigraphs or whatever, but I want to read you the dedication. There's the picture. It's dedicated for Uncle Bobby, sublime photographer of the wild, surpassing human face, and the lonely largesse of city streets. Cherry chestnut-eyed, with one peach orchard blooming mind, ablaze, always ablaze. Sweet-hearted, emphatic genius, who made his own heart up and refused to be shipped off to Vietnam in 1967, who instead was shipped across L.A. town for punishment that was community engagement, arriving at a black doll factory assembly line, where he made tamu, means sweet, shipping one to South Carolina to his niece, who had never held a black doll before. Uncle Bobby, patent holder and ACLU striver, leaving planet Earth just before his HIV cocktail could be shaken, stirred, served. That is one of the most beautiful things I've read, and I've read a lot of beautiful things. Just for this vlog, that just blows me away. I've only read one poem, but I read the introduction, which I just loved. I love her voice. And Nikky Finney comes from a storied South Carolina family. She was born in 1957 in Conway, South Carolina. Her father ended up becoming the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of South Carolina and was a civil rights attorney before then. Her mother was a teacher, And I'm understanding more of the title. Love Child was the nickname that attorney/judge father gave to her as a child, Love Child. And much is made in the introduction of hotbeds, and that is also in the title. Of course, we all know, I appreciated the refresher. A hotbed is an area of decaying organic matter, heated earth, a soil environment, enclosed in glass, fermenting, used for the germination of seeds, favoring rapid growth. After that dictionary definition, which sounds a little bit poetic, so I wouldn't be surprised if she created the dictionary definition, this paragraph just blows me away from the introduction. I've been on the hunt for how to have and keep a beautiful mind in the midst of old and new catastrophe, ever since I realized a beautiful mind was possible to have. I've kept a journal book since the age of 9 or 10. That has always been my path to helping me get there. Journal books were the garden of my interior. What ultimately arrived on the poetry page was first tended to and scratched around there in those beautiful weeds. I love that, and that resonates so well with my mystery guest by the time you see this vlog. A few weeks ago, Roland Allen, author of the Notebook book, there's an epigraph, although I guess it's an epigraph, from Ralph Waldo Emerson from 1844. The sugar they raised was excellent. Nobody tasted blood in it. And this is from, I guess, an essay, or maybe it's a lecture that he gave, abolitionist lecture. And it was like a modest proposal. So he was being ironic that people could put slavery out of their head because the sugar the enslaved people harvested or whatever, you couldn't taste blood in it, so why would we need to concern ourselves with how awful slavery is? And all I'll say about the first poem that I read, no, I have to tell you about the next epigraph as well. It's from Sandra Bland, that young black woman that was murdered in a police station by police. It was around the whole Black Lives Matter year. This was one of her Instagram posts or social media posts. Good morning, my beautiful kings and queens. And I looked that up, and that was her way of affirming black people. So I have read the poem. The first poem here is Auction Block of Negro Weather, and I read it out loud to myself. I'm tempted to read the whole thing to you, but then this vlog is going to be 2 hours long. It's about literally the slave trade and children being ripped from their parents, and also Africans being ripped from their continent, and it's just incredibly, heartbreakingly beautiful, powerful, and I will leave it at that for now. This book has been in my possession for years, and I'm now feeling a vibrating connection to it. I was at the bookstore today, and one thing that I picked up on the remainder shelf for $2 is this little chapbook by the Black Canadian writer, André Alexis. It's called Winter or a Town Near Palgrave. And Lindy has been coaxing me, urging me, nudging me to read André Alexis for years, and I still haven't got to him. And I thought, ooh, a little chapbook. It's one short story. I can fold that into my vlog. So I haven't read it yet, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about André Alexis. He was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. Grew up in Ottawa, now lives in Toronto, and received all kinds of awards, including the Giller, which I now that they've taken a big step towards not being fascist and supporting Israel military. They have a ways to go, but I will now at least mention their name again. That's the biggest award he's won, according to his Wikipedia. And he has written a bunch of novels, including a series of novels. And that's all I know about him, really. But this is a short story that he wrote, and for whatever reason, was published as a chapbook by Coach House Books. And this was a signed copy. So I plan to read it in its entirety, and this was published in 2022, and tell you all about that. All right, that's my check-in. Hey, just a quick addendum about an hour later. I'm slow on the uptake, and particularly emotionally, apparently, because when I was telling you all that incredible stuff, I wasn't feeling the emotion of it the way, and I realized this is why I'm doing this vlog. I want to connect with ordinary marginalized people and what they have and are experiencing, to keep myself balanced with what's all the fascist nonsense, the fascist stuff that's overtaking the world. It didn't hit me until a good half hour later. The power of that Sandra Bland social media post, "Good morning, my beautiful kings and queens," and what fate befell her, and how that resonates so powerfully in a way that I can't say because it would be a spoiler, with the Nafissa Thompson-Spires short story, title story, Heads of the Colored People. And that all came up viscerally for me. And I just wanted to append that to say that the fact that kicked in later, not while I was talking, it's grounded me in why I'm doing this in a way that I think I tried to justify or explain why I was doing this in my introductory thing. And now I'm deeply in touch with it. That's enough. That's it. Hey, but several days later, it's now Tuesday night, February 25th. And it's not like I've been ignoring this project since my last update. My time has been swallowed up by a bunch of positive stuff that I'm not going to talk about here, but I just haven't been able to do as much reading as I intended to. But that doesn't mean that I'm not even sure it's a vlog. I haven't got any footage for you. There must be a better word for this video than vlog. But anyway, this project has not been a failure. I have done my best. I have dabbled in a way that has filled me with hope and enthusiasm for continuing this journey and carving out a great big space next February. But beyond that, just continuing to read. Between now and then, this is my last check-in. I did get the hard copy of this lovely cover of this collection of short stories, Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver, and I read the first story, Neighbors. And holy smokes, was it powerful. It was very much on the nose about the civil rights movement somewhere down south in the 60s. And the school has been integrated. This family's young black son is going to be the first black student at his school, and he is traumatized. It's the night before he will enter this previously all-white school, and there's all kinds of civil rights lawyers and civil rights leaders in the house all the time, and there have been death threats. It feels so tense, and Diane Oliver takes you right inside the heart of this poor boy who's just shaking in his boots. And his protective mother and his father who's adamant that this is important and they're going to go through with this. You have to read the story, but that kind of a story that's focused so directly on civil rights, there's so many ways it could go off the rails and just be propaganda. But oh my God, Diane Oliver does in this story what fiction should do, which is get underneath all of the politics and both show why the politics is important, why the civil rights struggle is important, and also delve deep into the characters and the emotions involved. And it was absolutely unforgettable. I had hoped to read the whole book this month, and I only got to that one story, and that one story was absolutely incredible. I didn't plan to do anything more than read one story in Perfect Little Angels by Vincent Anioke, the queer Nigerian-Canadian writer. I'm going to play you a trailer for this book that shows you an excerpt from this story, which is about a young Nigerian boy who's going to go through the ritual, the Igbo ceremony called Ogbuafi, which is a kind of a manhood thing. It's not a circumcision ceremony, but it is a kind of scary ceremony for this particular Nigerian boy, who I read as being proto-gay. He's a mama's boy, and his dad doesn't like the fact that he's a mama's boy, and so it's very important to the dad that he has this ceremony. Loving mother, somewhat supportive older brothers, and it is a completely shattering experience that you must read the story to find out, that I just thought was a masterful story. can't wait to read more of these, and I was deeply impressed by this one. I got the physical copy of Danez Smith's latest book of poetry, Bluff, and I have the audio of it on Everand, and I listened to about 4 of their poems, and these poems are full of righteous anger. I think it's the second collection of their poetry that I've read from cover to cover. I haven't read this from cover to cover, but I fully intend to. Some of them do a lot of things with the formatting on the page, which was interesting. I don't know how to talk about any of that. The one I just read tonight is called It Doesn't Feel Like a Time to Write, which I think is the 4th poem, and I'm not going to read very much of it. I don't feel it's my place to read like a full poem from this book to you. You need to go to their audiobook and listen to them read it, but I'll read a couple lines that got all the way inside me. I've never been more afraid of a white man's loneliness. And the last 3 lines. It doesn't feel like a time to write when all my muses are begging for their lives. Powerful stuff. I have dipped into the anthology of Black Canadian life on the prairies, and boy, I sure intend to keep going with it at some point. What is it called? The Black Prairie Archives, edited by Karina Vernon. Yeah, just barely dipped into it. Really fascinating stuff. I'll tell you about 2 of these early entries. It starts with a biographical sketch and then excerpt from the writing. So the first one I want to tell you about is a Dr. Alfred Schmitz Shad, born 1870 in Ontario, died 1915, I believe in Saskatchewan. Yes, Melfort, Saskatchewan. And he was, I believe, the first black doctor in Saskatchewan. He is the nephew of a really famous black historical figure on both sides of the border, Marianne Shadd Khary, an abolitionist who came to lived in Canada for many years, but came originally from somewhere in the States and then went back to the States, but was a really influential figure in black life in Ontario. She was the editor of a newspaper, the Provincial Freeman, that was an abolitionist newspaper and black newspaper for people in both Canada and the U.S., and a very storied life that I want to know a lot more about. And this is her nephew, and he was also a newspaper editor and became an extremely well-educated doctor, studied in Europe and got involved in, like I say, started newspapers, opened a drugstore, blah, 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 did a whole bunch of stuff. And the other one was another really both of these people have Wikipedia pages. Mildred Jane Lewis Ware. She died young in 1905, but she and her husband were black ranchers in Alberta. She was literate, he was not. And so all the stuff that's in the archives from him, it was actually her that wrote it. And so there's some excerpts from some letters, some business letters that she wrote. She was a school teacher, and they were, it seems from this little biographical sketch, that in the late 19th century and the very early years of the 20th, that they were pretty well integrated into the community in which they lived, which is fascinating, and I'd like to know a whole bunch more about that. And that's as far as I got, but that was fascinating. And finally, the one thing I read from start to finish for this project was the André Alexis story, the chapbook, Winter, or A Town Near Palgrave. And I loved this. This is the first thing, as I said last time, this is the first thing that I have read by André Alexis. That in and of itself is great because it really motivates me to go on and read more of him. And this chapbook is signed by the author. This was a benefit for, I looked it up, printed in an edition of 1,000 signed copies for Independent Bookstore Day in 2022, April 30th. And as far as I know, has not been printed anywhere else. And this is fascinating. It is a story about, I think, autofictional. It's not based on real experience. It's quite speculative. It's not a work of realistic fiction in many ways, but André Alexis finds out about this town in southern Ontario that is called L with a dash. And in the old days, Victorian literature, whatever, they wouldn't say a place name. They would just put the first letter and then a dash. The town of L, which is somewhere near Palgrave. And he's heard it's a great place. So he goes with somebody to look at it. He falls in love with it, but it's a really weird town. And then he meets this eccentric Asian Canadian woman who kind of latches onto him. She doesn't live there full time, but she has been visiting the place for years, and she ropes him into spending time there, and it very quickly gets speculative in a way that usually I don't like, and he just carried me into it, so that this wacky story, there isn't very much about race. Reading for Black History Month doesn't mean that you have to be reading about race, as long as you're reading stuff by Black writers or about Black folk, right? To do with creativity and care and love and community. And it's a wacky story. And the wacky sounds negative. It's more than wacky. It's magically realist? I don't know. But I was here for it from start to finish, and I found the ending really moving. And that's all I'm going to say. But you know what? Because I love this story so much, I went back to the bookstore where I got it, and I snatched up the 4 remaining copies that the bookstore had. That is going to be a giveaway for those of you who watch right until the very end of this video. The first 4 people to say, I want one of the chapbooks, and also email me their mailing address anywhere in the world. These are small. They're not going to cost me very much to send. I will send them to you. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many people don't get to the very end of the video and miss the chance to get one of this story. It's a wonderful story, and it's introduced me to a wonderful writer. And this has been it's frustrating that I couldn't immerse myself in it. And that's my own damn fault. Both in the sense that I have all these buddy reads that I didn't plan to make a space. I'm going to atone for that. And I've had a lot of positive stuff that has taken my attention away from reading this month, but I'm going to atone for all that by fitting in as much of this really important, life-giving, wonderful reading on an ongoing basis for the rest of the year. The people and the communities that are under attack and that have a lot to lose under the current regime, it's those voices that we all, especially and including those of us who are more in the mainstream and may not be targeted so quickly as people from these communities, that we really need to drench ourselves in their stories and listen all the more deeply to their voices. And that's what I've got out of this project. Thanks for watching.